This was the other great insight was embracing non-attorney ICs, right? Because if your firm is, let's just say I bring in work and Steve, you grind the work out. Well, that's two different kinds of capacity limitation, but they're both capacity limitations. You can only bill so many hours or bill so many flat fees before you collapse. And I can only have so much time on telephone calls or meetings with people to do ICs. So if you allow that to be the constraining or defining factor in the firm, you can sit down and do the math and you can figure out everything else, how much office space you can have and how many employees you can have and how little salary you're willing to take, because it's all limited by those constraining factors. And the exciting part about saying no and taking myself out of that hero model and trying to look at things from a completely different perspective was it's almost theoretically infinitely scalable.
Yeah.
If I am no longer critical, it's amazing what we can see in an important part of the process. And, that's tongue in cheek. I understand that I'm important, but my importance is as a leader and thinking 6 months down the line, not editing your trust document today.
Yeah. Well, this is so, I've had Patty Paz on a couple of times to talk about what we would call the empowered team consultation process, where you're trying to teach and coach and teach people how to have non-lawyers do intakes. And you're teaching team members to do that. And, I've had, Liz on other podcasts to talk about that as well. And Marie, so I've had a couple of people on here. So in prior podcasts, if you're curious about that, go back to, we can put show notes and links so you can listen on a deeper dive. But I want to point out the thing that you said. I don't think, and I'm getting worn out talking about this, Rory, not with you, but with lawyers in general. And I'm losing interest and I'm losing patience in talking to them about these obnoxious ideas where it's obvious to me when I look at their practice that the constraint is their initial intake. And they'll say really funny things to me like, well, I'm so important because I have a 4-week waiting list, or it takes 6 weeks to get somebody in to see me. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, that's 4 to 6 weeks of cash flow you're not collecting. You're choking your firm's cash flow by that initial consultation process. If you open up the intake, you can have that cash today. And then when you bring in that cash today, you're going to have capabilities, people to do that work. So you got to build the pipeline so people can do that work. You open up the intake process. And once you realize, and there's more to it, where we're simplifying it, then it becomes an incredibly scalable firm and a very dominant firm, because your competitors are like, oh, no, only I can do initial meetings. But if you've got 4 people in your firm doing non-lawyer intake, you can take in 4 times the amount of volume, maybe 5 to 6 times the amount of volume. Your profit margins are going to be higher. You can turn the work around faster, and you can really kick the crap out of some really brilliant lawyers who are just so horribly fixed in their thinking that only I, as the lawyer, can do these things. And to do that, you had to go through an intentional decision that I no longer, meaning Rory, will no longer do these, and I will teach someone else to do them. So let's just talk about that decision-making process for a moment, because you didn't pop out and say, this non-lawyer thing is genius, I should do it. You said, no, I got to build capacity, I got to think it through, I got to train someone. So talk a little bit about that, because not only does that involve the non-lawyer initial there, but the thinking applies to every position in the firm, that the lawyer is currently the choke point, because you have it on intake, you have it on quality control, you have it on production, you have it scheduling, responding to emails, customer service, managing, leading, training, marketing. Everywhere you see a lawyer sitting, anywhere a lawyer's touching a keyboard is a choke point that's causing a constraint in that firm that's starving that firm. It can't grow because I got that lawyer at all those different choke points. So talk to me about how you see that. Talk to me about your thinking around it, because you've done a brilliant job in this area. Where else is capacity for you? So I'm talking too much. So where else is capacity for you? When you say capacity, what's that mean to you?
Well, if I can, I want to emphasize a point that you're talking about here too, because I think a lot of this has to do with expectations, and a lot of this has to do with it. One of the things that you want to do is to create success as a team. I think it's important for us. You did admit that you were oversimplifying, and I absolutely agree with that. But there is a difference between the fool and the evil. But you also need to understand that when you're interacting with, the evil person is the person who's just going to burn it down. You have the conflict, and that's the guy that gets up for the meeting and says, "I will destroy you, and I will destroy this firm. I don't care if anybody gets a dime out of it. I'm just going to destroy." You have to end those as fast as possible. Fools, most of us are fools, and we're really on a spectrum. And if you've got a firm, we've got almost 20 people in our firm. You've got people percolating. People are learning from experience, and they're watching the boss and how he interacts with others. So I don't make a conclusion that Joe is a fool and end that relationship. I attempt to model an appropriate behavior and give Joe a chance. Now, between you and me and a glass of bourbon, I may suspect that Joe is not going to pick up the challenge. And maybe 90% of the time that's true. But sometimes Joe does. But another thing that's important is everybody else in the firm sees that I'm not a judgmental, sanctimonious guy at the top of an ivory tower. And if you cross a line or piss me off, you're dead and gone. I need people to take risks and be thinkers. And I need them to see that what Rory said to Joe is, listen, you're doing something really important in this firm, and we need this to go this way. And I hope you can be the one. I really, really do. And so we're going to give it 90 days. Before the first 3 of those 4 partners I let go, I laid it out. And I gave it to him in numbers. And I said, this is where we need to go. And everybody agreed.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on one thing, which is I think any law firm can improve their initial consultation process, regardless of whether they got a lawyer or non-lawyer in it. Any law firm, any practice area, if they slow down and think about how they can create a phenomenal or at least a decent pre-education process. And this is one of the things that you've done really well. And a lot of lawyers, that I've encouraged, I don't care whether it's family law or criminal, the pre-education process. I would say that most lawyers, why most initial meetings end up being like a 3-hour hostage negotiation, is because they're trying to do too much in the meeting. And a lot of what they're doing in the meeting is 75% of the time stuff that they should have pre-educated the prospect on prior to the meeting. So the initial meeting should be a decision point, not a education point. And so There's a lot of ways, and you've done it, you've done it virtually, you've done it with webinars, you've done it with any form of pre-education, workshops. So as you're listening to the podcast, one of the things I'm going to encourage you to think about, one of the things that Rory had to wrap his brain around and think about is, what am I actually doing in this meeting that I could make it better for the prospect by giving them the luxury of listening to the educational materials, video, audio, both, in advance, so they have time, to watch it, think about it, process it. So it is, I think all law firms can do this. And what most lawyers, and this is one of the things that you've done really well, Rory, is that you've gone from, look, Steve, there's no way I can take any time off. I'm too damn important. So much is dependent on me. I got so much going on, But you started mulling with the question, well, if I do, what might be available? How do I create a great life? How do I create great practice? How do I do this? So you've been really doing a lot of thinking over the years and asking this question. One of the things that I think that you've done well is that you're able to create, like you said, space, taking time off to reflect, think, reflect, think, and declutter your brain and start saying, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. That's kind of, now I think about it, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why am I doing it that way? And where we get trapped as lawyers, that we respect a lot of other lawyers who are like, well, good Lord, so-and-so does it that way, and so-and-so does it that way, and so-and-so does it that way, so I should do it that way. And this is why I think it's so easy to become a market dominant player or to really grow a great practice, because once you notice that what some of your friends are doing, people that you respect, some of the people that you really think are running good practice or good lawyers, that's probably the time that you want to take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to say perhaps no how they do it, and I'm going to start questioning why they do it that particular way. Like, why do they do that? Why do they do it that way? It may not make a lot of sense. So you have to go against the gravitational pull of what normal good lawyers are doing and take a step back. And the only way you can do that sometimes is to have time off, catch a breath and come back.